Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. This is English 121, and my name is Lily. Today, I'm going to be talking about communicating, thinking, and feeling in a second language. Okay, to start with, in the process of learning, we go, of course, through different stages. Now, what I'm going to be sharing with you today is my personal process of learning as a native Spanish speaker who learn a second language, which in this case is English. So, of course, there are a lot of scientific facts about how the brain of a bilingual person works. But once again, this is just my personal experience, no scientific facts involved. And well, let's start with communicating. When we start learning a new language, of course, one of the main purposes of it is to communicate with another people. Now, when we want to communicate our ideas, we have to be ready to sound a little bit silly at the beginning. Why do I say this? It's because a lot of people are already, of course, professional, they're already managers, or they have certain position, right? That makes them feel that if they do not speak at a high level, they don't have this ability to be in charge of a group, right? So of course, compared to their native language, in this case, let's say Spanish, they cannot speak at the same degree in English, right? But once again, you have to kind of break that mental barrier, which is, of course, very difficult at the beginning because we are afraid of making mistakes. We don't want to sound like silly, when we speak a second language. But even though this is one of the first steps, it's also one of the hardest. And it personally happens to me when I learn, because I haven't only learned English, but I also learned Chinese in the past, and I'm also in the process of learning Russian. And yes, I totally can relate to people right at the beginning, but and for me it's very difficult to also try to communicate in those languages which I'm still learning. But I do my best to try to remember or to remind myself that it's okay to not sound perfect because, of course, we are in that process of learning. Now, the second step that often language learners we go through is thinking. Now, when we talk about thinking in a second language, is when you start like spontaneously uh, having ideas, right, without making hard effort. For example, this can happen actually from the very beginning because let's say one of the phrases that you learn in your second language is, "Hi, how are you?" And we have, through repetition, we know exactly what do we need to answer to this question. I'm fine, I'm good, I'm great, I'm wonderful, I can't complain, etc. Now, you are not actually translating this in your mind, right? Because a lot of people struggle with the fact of translation. They say, okay, so how do I start thinking in English, right? And this was a question that one of my students raised during the lesson. He asked me, do you actually think in English? And in my personal case, yes, I do. When I change to Spanish or the context is in Spanish, I automatically start thinking in Spanish, and that's it. That's my brain is there. It's like set up in that language. But when I have to speak in English, my brain also automatically changed to that. I cannot tell you exactly when that happened, but I can tell you that I didn't have to be fluent for that to happen. Okay, so a lot of people believe, okay, if I start thinking in English and I stop translating, that means that I need to be fluent. No, because once again, I go back to the example. Through repetition, a lot of times we learn to automatically respond to certain questions or to certain situations. So in that case, when someone asks you, how are you are not translating. You're not like, oh, ¿cómo estás? I need to answer this, right? You automatically do it. And that is the importance of exposing yourself to the language and repeating the words over and over. So in that way, it's going to be less and less hard for you to comprehend the language. And maybe all of a sudden, sudden start thinking in English. Of course, again, right, this is my personal experience. I know, as a matter of fact, for example, Sofia Vergara, I have seen some of her interviews and even some jokes that she made during some TV series that she starred at, when she said, of course, that she translates things in her mind. So I believe this happens still for a lot of people, but I don't think there is anything wrong with that either, right? Maybe you develop this skill of actually translating very quickly. Who knows? I haven't been in that point at that point yet, at least with English. I it happened to me that I start thinking in my second language. Uh, but I think that is closely related to the fact that, of course, I was exposed to the language through movies, music, like a lot of people do when we are in the process of learning, but also because I travel and I was, well, quite young when I came to the US for the first time. So I believe that context, social context, influenced a lot, to the point that there were many words that I actually learned in English that it's not like I don't know in Spanish. Of course, I know them, but I'm really bad at translating. A lot of times when my students ask me, what does the word realize mean? I, I remember the first time someone asked me this, I was like, what? I quite struggle, to express, because of course there is one word to translate that, but I couldn't say it. And that is because the word was in my mind, like as that realize, and I never thought of the meaning in English. And so I think that the social context helped me a lot in that way. But of course, not everyone travels to the country where they speak your target language. But of course, there are also some other ways, as I mentioned before, that you can expose yourself to the language. Now, I would say the third step, right? It's about feelings and emotions. Of course, we go through that process. We already learn to communicate. We start thinking in the second language, or we translate fast, and then feelings and emotions. A lot of people say that you are never going to have the same emotional connection as you have with your native language. But in my case, I think I developed a connection with English. And I remember this situation very well when I was, I think, 19, and I went to the US on this work and travel programs, and we faced a very difficult situation together with my friends, where we got robbed with some people, and even one of my friends, he got hurt. We were living in a city that was considered, at least at that time, like a third world city within the United States. So from the moment that we stepped into this city, I knew that things were not looking good. And we had some sponsors there who provide us the housing and all those kind of things. And I spoke from the very beginning, and I said, I don't feel secure, I don't feel safe in this place. And they said, no, it's okay, we can take you anywhere else. And well, then happened what happened, right? We got robbed, one of my friends got hurt, and then I contacted them, and there were 5 of us. But I remember that I was so emotional, so disappointed, so angry in that moment, that I don't know where all my ideas came from, but all of them were in English. And I just said everything I wanted to say, like letting them know that I knew that was going to happen, and that they should have listened to me from the very beginning. So I remember this very well, because in that moment I had a very strong connection with English, because I had no other way of communicating, right? And I needed to make a point and let them know how my friends and I were feeling. So a lot of times, emotional connection, I think they can be connected to a second language. Of course, that's gonna depend on each person. And nowadays, I can tell that my feelings are a lot connected to English. A lot of times when I want to express things in English, which is my second language, I feel like I can communicate them better even sometimes. But I think that depends on the context, right? Of course, there are probably situations. I don't know. Let's talk about sports, because as a matter of fact, I do play football, and I think when it comes to football, I express myself much better in Spanish than in English. But well, that's just an example, right? It's gonna depend a lot in the context, but once again, I think feelings and emotions can be connected to a second language, and it's gonna vary from person to person and situation to situation. Now, the last one, and well, I probably added this one, like, which is the part of dreaming. For some people might sound funny, right? Like they're like, how can you dream in a second language? Is that even possible? Well, it is, and I think it is possible even when you are not even fluent in that language. Why do I say this? Because when I was learning Chinese, I didn't have to be fluent until one day I suddenly happened to have a dream in Chinese. I think this was, of course, because at that time I was living there, and probably my dreams were a reflection of my everyday life. So, but once again, I wasn't any fluent at that time. Neither am I now. But I think the point here is that you can start having dreams in a second language even though you are not fluent. It's more about your desire of trying to express something, probably, and of course it's a reflection of your day by day. So when but when it happened to English, again, I don't know when that started, but I just also remember that I suddenly started having dreams in English, and of course, until now I do. Probably because I'm still exposed to the language. I don't live in a foreign country at this moment, but every day I expose myself through teaching, one. And the second one is that I always watch all content in English, like TV series, like even if I check Instagram, if I check different social media, uh, a lot of times, or most of the time, that is gonna be in English. So my brain is constantly receiving all this information and process it in English, and I think this is the reason why my dreams reflect the same thing. All right. Okay, well, that is well, a very brief, I would say. I tried to compact all my experiences all in one place. But what is most important, guys, is that do not feel afraid to make mistakes, okay? Language learning is a process, and I can relate to all of you because I've been through that process, and I still keep on going through that process. Uh, in fact, one of the reasons why I decided to study Russian is because I wanted to not forget what is to learn another language and what are the struggles that I go through, so my students wouldn't go through that same situation, and I will be more open to suggestions and also to get new ideas on how to help my students, because I know how to what is to go through that process. So once again, don't be afraid of sounding maybe a little bit silly, and it's all about a mental barrier. Once you cross that mental barrier, believe me, the language just follows its own flow. And even when you don't realize that you've been learning, there will be a point where you're like, oh, I don't know how, but I now can understand certain words or certain sentences. Language takes time, and it's a process that we all need to go through. Nobody's going to learn a language from one day to the other. Okay, so you gotta be patient, you gotta put a lot of effort, you gotta give time, and you gotta be motivated. But of course, we can't be motivated all the time, of course, but you need to persevere. And well, that will be all. Thank you for being here again with me. And I hope you will be together with me the next time. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, remember that you can always let me know in the comments below. Thank you. See you next time.